ESG and Sustainability webinar series. Today's topic, we're going to be discussing getting your head in the game with your overall sustainability strategy. Whether you're at the beginning of your journey or if you're kind of like progressing through it, this webinar will give you loads of advice on this topic. So I'm really excited to introduce our guest speaker, Aedín O'Leary. So Aedín will be discussing this topic. So just before I hand you over to her, I might just give a brief intro of herself. And thank you very much for joining us here today, Aedín. It's very much appreciated. So Aedín is an independent, non-executive director, investment and ESG consultant. So she's got over 25 years experience in the asset management and financial services industry. Not only this, but she's also the co-founder of the Green Team Network. This is an initiative which devises collaborative solutions for the Irish funds industry to play its part in tackling climate change. So it's fair to say that Aedín is quite an expert in this area, as she lives and breathes ESG, writing about it, and she just advises, writes, and does a lot of speaks about this topic and everything. So you're in safe hands. She'll be giving you loads of great advice here. Just to let you know, we are streaming this through Crowdcast and also through LinkedIn Live. So you can catch us on either of those platforms. And also, just to let you know, please, if you have any questions throughout the presentation or at the end of it, we'll be sure to just address those after. So just put them into the chat feature, even on Crowdcast here or else on LinkedIn Live. So yeah, that's not a problem at all. So without further ado, Aedín, I'll hand you over to yourself to give your presentation. And thank you very much again for joining us on here.
Thanks so much, Emer and Involve, for inviting me along, and hello to everybody who's joined today. I will just start by seeing if I can share my slides. And thank you for that introduction, Emer. I think you've saved me a bit of what I was going to cover, so that's great. Just bear with me now till we get this up. Yes, so hopefully that is up and running now. So ESG and sustainability, and effectively getting your head in the game. So I thought I would start with a bit of context, and Emer has covered all these really already in terms of where I am in terms of the current chapter of my career. So yes, an independent non-executive director. I'm on the board of 2 charities and about to join the boards of 2 regulated financial entities in the not too distant future, and no doubt ESG and sustainability feature in each of those roles to differing degrees and in different ways. I'm also an investment and ESG consultant, and that stems from, I suppose, an executive career in asset management and investment and financial advisory firms, where among my earliest clients were a number of charity investors. So they would have been the earliest group who were interested in any kind of responsible or ethical investment. And I suppose now that I'm in the kind of consulting and non-exec side of things, I still advise a number of those charities and institutional investors when it comes to evaluating asset managers, especially when they have an ESG mandate, or helping them build out what they want within their ethical investment policies and so on. And then on a broader level, like outside and beyond the investment industry, I give, I suppose, guidance and training to on the ESG related matters to other organisations. So Emer mentioned as well, definitely my passion project for the last 2 years, and my kind of key to my sanity really during COVID was getting involved with the launch of a network, co-founding it with some other wonderful people from the funds industry called the Green Team Network, to bring people from the industry together to share their ideas and experiences and leverage off each other to do more collectively, to have greater impact on tackling climate change. And our focus was, because it was run by the funds industry in the first instance, was that particular sector. But increasingly, I know we have a mixture of backgrounds and so on the webinar today, but we like to think that it's a network that's relevant to not just the funds sector, not just the wider financial services sector, but hopefully lots of other sectors too. And lastly, tripleline.ie. Well, this is my website where I suppose try to capture all of the above under one roof. And it's where I, as well, if I've kind of some opinion pieces or useful guides, I tend to put them there. So both Green Team Network and Tripleline are there as websites that you can access to. So I suppose just moving on. Well, with the topic we have today and getting your head in the game, I was thinking about, well, what can I bring to the table? And I suppose I offer two perspectives here. One is as what I call myself a tour guide, and the other is as a distiller, I suppose, of information. And what I mean by being a tour guide is that I suppose I have grown up in the land of ESG, if you like, because from the early days of those original charity investor clients I had who were interested in ethical investment, and I've seen the kind of iterations in between. So I was there when there was nobody living in the neighbourhood, right up to the present day when it's a highly condensed area with lots of participants and everyone getting on board. So like I know the road I live on myself very well, as in the area of responsible investment. I've been highly immersed in that over the years. But I can also show you around the general neighbourhood in that there are some parts I know very well also, but my neighbour next door may know more about it if you want to deep dive. So I hope I'm kind of useful as a signposter of where you're going to get expert knowledge in this space in different ways. And then as a distiller of information, I suppose throughout my career, especially the executive career, I've been steering individuals and organisations with making financial and investment decisions, often with ESG or ethical kind of considerations at the heart of it. So I've had to kind of, like the rest of us, absorb a huge amount of information in this field and try and break it down in some kind of digestible way that helps people make decisions. So because I've had a job of distilling information, hopefully I can share some of that kind of distilled information with you today and give you an indication of what I find helps to make sense in the area of ESG and sustainability. So I thought it might be useful to look at some definitions around, what even does sustainability mean? And there are so many different definitions out there, and all mostly anyway right in their own way. But I'll share two that speak plainly to me anyway on the subject, in the hope that they might be useful to some of you. And I do appreciate this. It's like teaching maybe some of you to suck eggs because you're well involved in this space already. But if a sustainable business is one that aims to meet triple bottom line results, so not just looking at making financial profit, but taking into account people, planet, and profit. So the 3 Ps, a triple bottom line approach. So for me, one definition of sustainability is that it relates to considering the people, the planet, and the profit aspect. Then a second definition I have around sustainability that I find useful is looking at the 3 elements of ESG, environment, social, and governance factors. So there are 3 components of ESG, as you will know. And they're a way of looking at the risks and the opportunities in an organisation through each of those 3 kind of prongs. And then you add on, which is always going to be important, the financial considerations of an organisation. So my second definition of sustainability would be that it is equal to ESG plus F, F being financial and monetary considerations. So there you have it. In my head, the easiest way to understand sustainability is to use one or both of these definitions, and that's where I kind of stand on this really. So I think the next thing I would like to do, you're asking why is there a picture of an elephant on the screen? Well, really it's to address that elephant in the room, and that elephant in the room is that fact that ESG, I suppose, over the last while has taken, it's been given a bit of a rap on the knuckles. It's been tested, the validity of it for lots of reasons over the last few months in particular, with headlines out there about it not being fit for purpose and so on. So I wanted to raise that at this point just to remind us all that ESG is and was always intended to be a framework or a lens through which to look at different risks and opportunities in a business or even a non-profit context. So a set of kind of guiding principles for assessing these risks and opportunities. And like any kind of framework, it's only as good as or as bad as how it's implemented. And there are plenty of examples of it being badly implemented and plenty of examples of it being well implemented. So I, for one, believe we should stick with it as a framework. Now, not blindly, to continually try and refine it and fix some of the flaws within it, and to just basically try and get the best out of it and evolve it over time. So for the purposes of today, I'm going to ask that elephant, the negativity around ESG, to leave the room for now, and let us concentrate on what we think we can do in a positive way around ESG. And you will notice as well, apologies for this, is that I slip interchangeably between ESG and sustainability in my own terminology. So I hope that isn't adding further confusion on the subject. They are similar, they are related, there's no doubt about that. But hopefully, depending on what I'm talking about on screen, it'll be clear to you what I mean if I say ESG or sustainability. So if we are making a case for ESG, and developing sustainability strategies, we're often trying to persuade others to come with us on the journey. So I think now is a good time to look at, well, like, what are the main constituents of making the business case for developing a sustainability strategy and using the ESG framework. And as far as I'm concerned, if you want to convince someone of the merits of ESG and sustainability, there's going to be three key motivators. And this was explained, I thought, very well at a seminar I was at recently, and just these three constituents. You'll subscribe to it because you have to, because there's maybe a regulatory imperative or a code of conduct that's telling you must do so. Or you will look at the fact that there's potentially a commercial value to this, that there's profit to be had down the line by becoming a sustainable organisation, a cost benefit maybe for shifting to more renewable energy. It's going to be some kind of differentiator giving you a competitive edge, that there's a rationale around there, that there's the commercial benefit there. And thirdly, the third motivator is because it's the right thing to do. So looking at the moral case, aligning the purpose and values of your organisation with doing the right thing, protecting the 3 Ps, people, planet and profit. So depending on who you are and where you are, you will be somewhere between wanting to do no harm on this front and to do good. And many of us will be, somewhere in the middle. And how you pitch the case to whoever it is you're trying to persuade, whether you're the top person in the organisation trying to bring the staff along with the concept, or you're the staff trying to convince the board, for example, that this is what we must do. You will pitch your case on whoever you're talking to. So if it's your risk officer you're trying to persuade, you're possibly going to focus more on the you have to, because this is what will happen if we don't, the risk side of things. But maybe if you're in HR, you're going to be more interested in the right thing, because you're thinking in this day and age, it's all about, especially with the millennials and the next generation, it's about having purposeful careers, choosing organizations to work with because they have a good sustainability record. So that will kind of pique your interest more. So that, for me, they're the main components of making the case for ESG and sustainability. But, making the case is one thing. I mean, if we accept that, you want to move forward on your sustainability journey, how are you going to make it successful? And on that front, I would say that there are several different key ingredients, and I'll just run through a number of them. You could spend a whole day on each of these really, but we don't have time. We're just kind of going to give a flavour today. But for my money, these are the ingredients towards being successful at this. 1 is the mindset. 2 is your level of understanding. 3 is how you lead and champion your sustainability efforts as an organisation. Charting the course, so setting the direction right. Various actions, resource allocations and timelines along the way. And I've said it 3 times here: communicate, communicate, communicate. So how you tell your story to the various relevant stakeholders. Just getting into this a little bit more. And what Socrates had to say about this, what he said is he could have changed his focus on the and, if you don't see the imperative in it, you will just ultimately be left behind. So I think, and it's not something that necessarily happens overnight, but what you want is to shift the mindset from that of viewing ESG and building out your sustainability story as being a burden. In other words, we know we should, but do we have to seeing it as more an opportunity to be embraced. We can and we will and we must. And that also, on a mindset point of view, is asking you to be not just short-term in your thinking, where you're concerned about there may be an initial outlay towards ramping up your efforts in ESG and so on, and there may be a cost commitment, there may be resources to be funded. But on the other hand, in the short term, you may make some cost savings. For example, if you're looking at your, cheaper energy sources, more eco-friendly energy resources and that. But it's really about just not getting stuck in the short-term considerations and looking at the fact that over the long term, this could be what ultimately makes us sustainable financially and otherwise. A second really important ingredient is checking your understanding. And by that I mean is like understanding who in your organization understands climate risk, other environmental factors, the social issues, and the key governance issues that, tick the various elements of ESG. And that's about understanding, be it at executive or board level, who has the knowledge. Do you have the knowledge? Are there gaps in the knowledge? Is there enough knowledge around this subject within your organization? And if there isn't, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to bridge the gap? And there's a number of answers to how you do that, whether it's recruiting people with the requisite skills and expertise. But there's training and advice to be had out there readily available, and more on that anon. But it's available out there if you just know where to go. And there's so much of it if you know how to kind of narrow it down. And sometimes a lot of this will be available for free from certain organizations who are setting up their stall advising in this space. They provide workshops, be it online or otherwise, to your staff or to your board. And then there are sustainability consultants also, many fantastic people in this space. And a number of them will qualify for funding through, I'm not sure, I will check, it's Enterprise Ireland or one of the bodies out there gives funding, a certain amount of funding towards getting some consultancy advice. So there are ways to readily become more conversant, because you need to become more conversant, more natural and at ease in this space so that you grow your organizational knowledge around ESG and sustainability. Thirdly, sustainability champions. Every organisation needs one, if not more. So who's going to lead your efforts on the sustainability front? Who's really going to build this out within your organisation? Is it going to be an individual? Is it going to be a group of people? Is it going to be driven by the board? Is it going to be a role at C-suite level, like a chief sustainability officer? Is it going to be a brand new role? Is it going to be a task force you set up? Is it going to be using existing team members? Are you going to be bringing in new recruits? And also to be very clear about the fact that while the board will oversee the efforts in this space, who's going to do the execution? So who is going to deliver on the sustainability strategy and who's going to report on it? So to have clear lines of responsibility for your sustainability champions, as I'd call them, or your sustainability leads. And very often, there's somebody right under your nose in an organisation who is keen as mustard to get involved in this space. They just need the opportunity, and they can sometimes be your absolute best asset. So it's to kind of look around your organization and see who can be really instrumental in this space. And I would just make the point, and I touched on it earlier, that they're saying now that I think by 2025, the global workforce will consist primarily of millennials and Gen Z. So that's people between the age of about 20 and 40 now. Will make up about 75% of the workforce in a few short years. And all the reports and surveys out there will tell you the evidence is there about how this group, this demographic, absolutely expects sustainability within the organizations they work for. So if you want to attract and retain the right talent in this space, you've got to move along this journey. It absolutely, a sustainability champion or champions, this drive needs to be someone's specific role, specific priority, and with a genuine brief to deliver on it. So this is where it sounds kind of really obvious, I suppose, charting your course. And apologies for how obvious it is, but for many businesses setting out and wanting to become seriously sustainable, it's so important to decide where you want to get to and how you want to get there. So charting your course, as I say. and starting to build that story. You'd be amazed the number of organisations who take a view that we'll just improve a few little things. We'll cut down on our paper and our plastics usage, or we'll allow more flexible work practices, or we look more closely at our gender balance. All highly commendable measures, of course, but for real lasting impact, they need to be pulled together as part of the bigger picture, the bigger vision. And it also needs to be more than just a one-off effort. This is an iterative process. But like I say, there's a starting point and you have to start somewhere. So starting with, what are we doing at the moment? What's our baseline? This is where we are now across a number of different metrics, E, S, and G, and to set targets in each of those spaces. And I would encourage all organisations, be ambitious. If you're not ambitious, you'll only half do it. We all need to be ambitious here and raise our game. To develop appropriate KPIs and metrics. And as I said earlier, understanding very clearly who's going to deliver and report on these. And like any kind of board game almost, if you're setting out a course, you would expect it to be dotted with particular milestones and achievements rather than just the end destination. So to have those milestones and stepping stones identified in between. And then, as I mentioned earlier, effective communication. I mean, you do all this, but you must communicate it to all the relevant stakeholders to get the relevant buy-in to what it is you're trying to do. And just building on that, your ESG sustainability story. So I will put it to you that every organisation already has a story. I think you'd be hard pressed to find an organisation who isn't doing something positive or the opposite of negative in the ESG space on some front. And you know that there's some starting point to say. But like, what is your story at the moment, and what should or will it be? And that can be the hardest conversation to have, to kind of get going or to get moving off your current point. And always a useful compass, whether you're at the start or you're just stuck on at the end of a particular chapter, is going back to the 3 pillars of E, S, and G, and not even and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We'll look at this a bit more in a minute. Understanding your audience, because if you're trying to work out what the priorities of your organisation should be, different priorities will resonate with your shareholders, with your board, with your customers, with your supply chain, with your staff. So all perspectives need to be taken into consideration in some way. In terms of moving off and moving along your sustainability journey, there's usually some low-hanging fruit and quick wins to be had there. And again, I'll come back to that. And what I would really urge any organisation to do at this stage, whether you're in a sector where there's already mandatory pressure to report and disclose on in terms of non-financial reporting on ESG, if you're not, whether it's mandatory or not, I would encourage your organisation to really get familiar with the different reporting frameworks that are out there. We know that there is still confusion about what is going to be acceptable data, reporting data going forward, and universally acceptable data across these metrics. A lot of work has happened, but there's so much more to do. But getting familiar, there is no point waiting until it's perfect. I would encourage any organisation, we can all gather data of one type or another that will tell our story. And I would put the case that done is always better than perfect. Getting started rather than waiting till the last minute, it only has you on the back foot. And I don't know, I think it was Benjamin Franklin or something came up with this expression, although some people attribute it, I think, to Roy Keane down in Cork, is fail to prepare to fail. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. So as I mentioned earlier, in terms of kind of, well, like, what is your ESG story and what should it be? Well, I think it should be one for any organisation. It's impossible, really, unless you're majorly resourced on this front, to do absolutely everything. So it makes sense to focus on where your organisation can have the most impact. And that will depend on the type of industry your organisation you are, the size and the scale, and so on. So I would say that the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 of them, are a very useful reference point. And it's worth considering these in your own in the context of your own organisation. And for example, I heard someone from the board of Kerry Group, for example, recently talking about their sustainability strategy and how it evolved. And they said when they looked at the Sustainable Development Goals, the one that jumped out of them straight away was SDG number 2, zero hunger. Of course, they're a food and nutrition company, so they immediately felt this is where we can and should have significant impact. I spoke to a recruitment company recently who really identified with SDG 8, that's decent work, and SDG 5, gender equality, really felt they could make a difference there. If you're an infrastructure or transport company, maybe SDG 11 is going to be key because it's about sustainable cities and communities, for example. So this is not to say that you should just hone in on one or two, but it's to say that it's inevitable that you're going to have a greater focus in one or two areas than others for obvious reasons. And I mentioned earlier that a reference point, the E, S and G pillars or the SDGs, or perhaps both together. So if you can take the SDGs and you as an organization realize I want to do what I can under each of these pillars, you can do both. So for example, you would have some of the SDGs that will tick the box under S and G, for example. So let's say gender equality. You want to be living this in a governance perspective as an organization. Of course you do, like the running and the future direction of your own company. You want there to be gender balance and equality in that. But you also want to see this practiced in the companies where you invest, the companies whose goods and services you buy, in the countries in which they operate, and so on. So in each case, you look at what's relevant for your own organization. So personally, I think this is a really useful way to focus the mind and decide what your story should be. Something I mentioned briefly was about quick wins. And this is where I may appear to contradict myself. So there's certain successes that can be achieved with relatively small effort, but can help the ball rolling and in terms of delivering ESG outcome and impacts and sustainability outcome and impacts. And they'll build momentum in your organization and will help you gather support along the way. And this is what I call the low-hanging fruit. So it's not that they are instead of the overall sustainability strategy, but it's more that they will be part of it. And the key is that they aren't kind of isolated. They aren't just a one and done approach. We'll just do this one project and leave it at that. It's about building on that. And then within that, communications to the relevant stakeholders is obviously key, because you need to make sure that those who should know about what it is you're doing on this front do know what you're doing on this front. So it's about having a clear, well-targeted communication strategy as well. I won't go through this in great detail, but I just have jotted down there some samples under E, S and G of some activities that are fairly easy to get started on. For example, just stopping and working out or starting to calculate the carbon footprint of your company. That can be done using utility bills, for example. Staff training is an easy way to get started as well. As much as anything, that regardless of the size of your organization, there's so much resource available, relatively easy and very often for free, and so on. And going paperless, plastic free, even, I don't know if you were on the earlier sessions organised by Envolve, but they spoke about helping organisations go a lot more paperless with their training and so on within organisations. So there's plenty of organisations and resources out there to draw on. And there are templates for literally everything on Google. So I've put under social there, for example, you could do a survey of your staff under the diversity, equity and inclusion side of things to see, well, what does the organisation, what do the staff within think of us? You might say, how would I even phrase such a survey? I guarantee you someone else has done it. It's there on the internet and you can take that down and modify it appropriately for your own organisation. So they're just some samples. And in doing all this, I would say, be very careful with the what. Now, what I mean by that is any way that you overstate as an organisation what you are doing on the E, S or G front is a dangerous place to be, because if you don't have the evidence to back this up, you're potentially going to be held over the coals. And we have seen lots of high profile examples of this, greenwashing in particular, overstating one's environmental credentials. A lot of large well-known organisations in hot water over this lately. Rainbow washing is another example. maybe not as widely covered, but where you claim to be a highly inclusive organisation and you're out there waving the pride flag, but in truth, if you were to survey your organisation, they might say, well, we don't feel like we're a very inclusive, open, everyone considered kind of organisation. G, governance washing. It's where an organisation is stating that they're very strong on ESG based on the fact that they've always been good on the governance side of things without any particular emphasis that they can back up on the ENS. And then a term I recently learned called competency washing. And this is where an organisation maintains that they're now experts in ESG and that they're highly qualified in ESG. And it may be that they have just recently completed a course or they recently appointed someone to a role. And the truth of the matter is, it takes time to bed down all that expertise and to build it up within an organisation. So overstating that's a particular bugbear of mine, especially on the responsible investment side of things. Then I would really, and it goes back to the fact that I was involved in founding the Green Team Network. I have seen really firsthand how, when it comes to promoting and advancing your sustainability efforts and bringing others with you, that leveraging off and into a network is absolutely invaluable. But looking even without going into a particular network, there are so many resources there when it comes to making your business more sustainable and learning more and finding guides and templates for what to do and how to do it. There's so much available at the click of a button if you know where to look. And you'll find that there are people involved in the sustainability space on the advisory side, even like myself, who are more than happy to give you a steer and a signpost into what they find useful content and where best to look. So I would take up any offers or even reach out yourselves to those who should know and should be able to save you time and effort as you conduct major search of information. Just take advantage of those who've already tried to distill it somewhat. And then tapping into your own networks and different kind of think tanks. Acting on climate change and other sustainability challenges is, quite frankly, so urgent that unless you have to build something from scratch, we don't have time and resource to build things from scratch here. If something has been done already successfully, even if the template works and you could modify it and refine it better yourself, your organization, find out what others are doing and use your networks to do that, and be they your own personal and professional contacts or particular groupings that have come together to kind of condense information and experience around ESG and sustainability. And I've listed there some of the networks that are out there. There's far more than these. Like the Green Team Network, as I mentioned, is for the funds industry, but it's not exclusive to the funds industry. And even if I were in funds, I would just as quickly look into the other networks. So Origin Green, more food focused, because there could be incredible content there as well and incredible people who can share their experiences. And some of the legal and accounting and other professional services firms will provide hubs of information and free training often in this area as well. So I would avail very much of what's out there. And a term that has been coined, I'm not sure when it was coined, but I think was never more relevant than in the area of ESG and sustainability, and that is co-opetition, where effectively you're cooperating with your competitors. So that's sitting down around a table, even though you're technically competing for the same business, but learning what each other is doing, whether it's kind of working through your supply chain, how others are experiencing that and how they're having influence on the ESG side of things. And maybe as a group, as a sector, it's a bit easier to come together and apply more pressure collectively and just raise everybody's game in this space. So I can't say it strongly enough. Use your networks and leverage off it rather than starting from scratch. Boards on board. So, you know, there's just no doubt about it. And I suppose I'm a non-exec director myself, but one of the most important messages I want to convey today is that all the efforts of staff, management, task forces in ESG, and all of that within an organisation will inevitably flounder if they don't have the genuine support and buy-in from the board. And the board should ensure that the sustainability strategy that it signs off on can be aligned very much with the overall corporate vision, so it can be explained and communicated and people understand within the organisation and out in the wider stakeholder group, how it all fits in and ties in together. They're ensuring that kind of marriage of corporate, overall corporate vision and sustainability vision is very much the responsibility of the board. And I would see absolutely that the board must stand behind whoever and whatever group or individuals it assigns the kind of sustainability lead to support them in their endeavours and to actually give them genuine scope to do the job. So no tick box mentality, just developing a role and there you go, tick. Now we're a sustainable organisation. We've done that. It absolutely needs the buy-in and the walking the talk from the board. And the board can delegate the implementation, of course, of the various ESG components to the executive and the management, but it cannot delegate the responsibility for overall sustainability of the company. That is at the behest of the board, without doubt. And what I would also say is that there are very important, I suppose, tips for ESG in the boardroom, and I've spoken to a number of groups about this and how they're addressing ESG within their board meetings and that. And I think the main thing is to ensure it's always on the agenda. From this moment onwards, at your next board meeting, make sure ESG is covered, whether it's on a standalone basis, a standalone item, while everyone's kind of getting to grips with what it means, or whether it's integrated. I mean, what we would really like to see, and what I genuinely hope will happen, that ESG will become so integrated in the same way financial considerations and operational considerations are factored into decisions and risk assessments and opportunity assessments. The hope would be that you don't have to separately think of ESG going forward, and that it'll just become absorbed and integrated into all business decisions. But until then, it may be that you have to do it as a standalone item while everyone is coming up the curve. Identify the gaps that there are in your board and throughout your organisation, be it in knowledge, skills, people, technology, and so on. I mean, just make sure that gets covered at the board consideration level. And to try and, again, back to mindset, of course, the emphasis of the board and the priority is going to be ensuring we do all the mandatory stuff on this side of things, that we report and comply with all requirements. But even if you're not in an organisation or a sector that's going to be subject to regulatory scrutiny straight away and being mandatory on that side of things, it'll be mandatory because your customer base inevitably and eventually will make it mandatory for you. They'll insist on you being a more sustainable organisation. So to look at it in a voluntary way as much as a mandatory way was what I would be encouraging boards to do. And that, in a way, brings us towards the end of my part here, the official or the kind of formal presentation part. I just want to mention, though, and it was an asterisk on the previous slide, that like all the ESG information and making sense of it and accumulating it all, it is a minefield. There's no doubt about it. Even for people who are immersed in it day to day, it is a minefield, and it's continually changing and more to learn and more to take in. But the recent launch in Dublin of the hub of a broader entity called Chapter 0, which is focused on boards and how they look at climate risk. That is a really useful resource for information on the climate change side of things and how boards look at it. But it's also, it's just useful information beyond the board available there. So anyone who's a director can sign up to be part of that. So I would encourage that to all who it's relevant for. So look, for nearly every slide I've covered, we could have spent the whole session on one or those slides, or nearly a whole day on any of them. There's so much to absorb, there's so much to consider. And the word I often hear coming from those who are grappling with it all is how overwhelming it all is. And it is. And like not knowing where to start, having so much to do, not enough people to do it, and yet there's no time to waste. So it's a lot of pressure coming to bear, and it can feel overwhelming. So all of this is absolutely true, but just to remember there really is help at hand, and it may be closer than you think if you only know where to go. So I've just listed here some of the resources and guides where the categories, I should say, where I know there's lots of information to be had, and I would be more than happy, as I know so many people in the sustainability space would be, to help signpost you towards any of those kind of resources. So I would very much encourage you to do that. And I guess my main message to you today, and if I've succeeded in anything at all this afternoon, it would be to encourage you, if you're kind of stalling and just waiting to move off and do more on the sustainability side of things within your organization, please just don't wait. Don't wait another minute, because there just is no time to waste. There is no perfect time to do it. The time is now. So just avail of what's out there, get stuck in, and together, hopefully, we can ramp up everybody's efforts. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and I would be more than happy to take any questions anyone has.
Aedín, thank you so much
sharing.
For that. Sorry. Oh yeah, perfect. Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much for that, Aedín. That was really insightful, and really gets you thinking about your sustainability strategy and just how really important it is to implement it in businesses these days. And also, like, I suppose, as you say, there's a lot to take in, but it has to be done. And I say there's no time like the present. So if you haven't started your strategy, you need to do it as soon as. So we just have to, so thank you very much for that. That was absolutely brilliant. We just have a few questions that's come in there, Aedín, if you don't mind. So we have
an apology, just so people know, I won't have seen these because I was on presentation. So
no worries at all. So Stephen is asking, how should a company implement a sustainability policy? Best practice, would it be to educate current leaders in the organization, or maybe recruit externally? Or what kind of advice would you give here on that one? That's a great question, Stephen.
Yeah, it actually is a great question, and I'm probably going to give you the predictable answer that there isn't a one size fits all answer. It will depend on your organization and the the size of it, the scale of it, the people within it, and in terms of where. So I suppose what I would say in the first instance is I would try to understand, well, what knowledge have you got within your organization already?
Well, that's it.
So understand what you do have, and that's about having conversations with, depending on what level you're at, with your board, with your management team, with your younger, more junior recruits. There may be someone right under your nose, as I said earlier, who has a particular interest and experience in this. Now, that is not to say that sometimes, especially if you find, look, we just don't seem to have the information and the knowledge we need in the organisation here. There is nothing to be lost by speaking to kind of some external advisors even.
Of course,
And as I said, you'd be amazed how much of that is available. Now, I'm not trying to do all the sustainability consultants out of business and asking them to do everything pro bono, but there is an element, and you will find people who are genuinely in this space are just happy to help people get started. So I would, as I say, tap into, depending on, I don't know what sector Stephen is in, for example, but talk to others in the space, be it in your sector or using some of those resources I mentioned there. And if it's a thing you don't have it within your organisation, either the existing people or the appetite, then you may be better to recruit externally.
Explore options externally. No, that makes perfect sense. But it's better to tap into your organisation and the people that you have there as well, because they could have more knowledge.
Absolutely, and to be really authentic about it and appreciate that it's not just about giving someone a title. It's about what can they bring.
What can they bring to the
genuinely,
table,
honestly, to the table? Yeah.
Perfect. We just have another question there from Anita, who is asking, how would an organisation go about accurately mapping their ESG baseline? Another really good question there, Anita.
Absolutely. And again, ESG baseline. So there's going to be a baseline across different elements. So like E, for example, you want to maybe get you're trying to understand what the carbon footprint of your organization is. So that's a prime example of, if you might recall me saying that I'm a tour guide. So if you asked me to help you develop an ethical investment policy, I'd be saying, that's my domain. But if you ask me to help you measure your carbon footprint, I'm going to say, I know the people who are going to help you on that front. So there's lots of people or organizations who kind of specialize in this space. There are also resources online on this, but that's just one example. That's under E. Then S and G. Do you know what? And it goes back to data. Okay, in certain sectors, I should say, it's becoming prescriptive as to what data you need to report on, and in others, there's no guidance and there's no uniformity on that. But it is not, without being trite, it's not rocket science to be able to say, for example, say you decide on S, we're going to look at our diversity and inclusion and that within our organization. You can get a template, for example, out there, figure out what kind of metrics it is you want to establish, and you can work that out very readily within your organization. So what I'm saying is, depending on the scale and complexity of your organization, this could be a very simple task that you don't need specialist expertise to do. But obviously, if you're much bigger, then you may need to get more professional assistance and guidance involved.
And as
I
you
hope
said,
that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, doing something that's quite impactful, like, for your organization too. You gave a few examples there about a few different companies. And I think that's very important as well. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You kind of think about it, like, more so than just kind of like doing anything.
Sorry, I just want to say one more thing about the accurately mapping your baseline. Obviously, the fear out there is great fear out there because of some of the terrible greenwashing scandals that, my God, imagine if I honestly and authentically reported what I thought was genuinely true and it ended up not being, right? That's a real fear, whether you're a director or otherwise in organization. But, an honest, authentic effort. If you're not in an organization where it's not prescriptive yet in your sector about what you to do, what I'm saying is, you be as accurate as you can be until you're told this is the exact some relevant, honest data is better than no data, in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. And John Curran on our first webinar discussed all that about greenwashing and everything as well. So that was pretty insightful. We just have another one there, Aedín, it's from Chloe. So Chloe's asking, is there any particular advice for good ways to cover ESG and sustainability matters at board meetings? So that's one of the topics everyone wants to discuss, and to ensure it gets the attention it needs. So getting it across and trying to convince, I suppose, the proper people. So do you have any? Thanks, Chloe, for that question.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. There I've spoken to people on different boards, and it's being addressed in a number of different ways. I think the most common way I'm seeing it, starting to be included for organizations who are kind of maybe a little bit later to the party and are just getting started now, is to put it in the first instance as an agenda item, right? So if it has never really been addressed in any major way at board level, have that initial conversation as a board. Okay, guys, we need to discuss this, and how are we going to table it? We're going to table this at every future board meeting. And what I've seen some groups do is they table a different topic for each meeting. That's a different theme. So it may be that, and I think we'd all agree with, God, the heat waves of the last few weeks, the real urgent one is climate change and climate risk and understanding that. So I would see a lot of emphasis. That is not to forget the other parts, but I would see a lot of emphasis in boards about bringing everyone up the curve on the climate change side of things. So, and Chloe, on that, it's probably there's an example of, say, for that particular one, I would, if I were you, maybe look at the Chapter Zero website, for example. They give great guidance on how you might tackle that in the boardroom. And, the other way I've seen it, and it depends on the organisation, is that and the sector. But if part of the reporting pack in at the board is, say, the finance pack, the HR pack, the governance pack, or whatever, is sometimes it's preferable for a board that the ESG is going to be included, within each component, not as an overall topic, but it's going to be factored into the reporting in each of the operational areas. That works too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great advice there. Perfect. And thanks everybody for their questions there. I don't see any any others coming through, but no, that was brilliant, Aedín. Thank you so much for your
Okay,
time. And
thanks so much.
yeah, and just let everybody know that we'll be sending the recording of this and also the presentation slides also. So you can have a look back at them, and if anyone wasn't able to make the whole session today. Well, listen, thank you so much. Very insightful stuff. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed it. And I will, yeah, Aedín, I will speak to you soon, and everyone have a lovely evening.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone.
Bye. See you later.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.